Hi, welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is a show where we blend the love of music with the love of whiskey. Joining me are Drew Crawley and Benjamin Eves, and I, as always, am Kevin Rose. Tonight, we're going to be talking about one of the most prolific producers in music history, not just rock music, but across any and all genres, really, and that is Rick Rubin. But before we get into Rick Rubin, the guys and I have made some cocktails for you tonight, doing something a little bit different. And we're going to take some time, tell you about them, see what you think, see what we think of each other's work. So, Drew, let's start with you, buddy.
All right, right on. Well, I haven't talked about it much on the show, but I am in the middle of a sober October with some friends. We're doing a little workout challenge and taking a break from drinking, just as overall health and just checking in. It's always good to do that from time to time. And so this one was a little bit of a challenge for me, but I consulted some friends of mine that bartend around various spots about, the difference between mocktails and I have been at some events where I'm doing sober times or whatever before, and the mocktails usually suck. It's some fruit juice and some kind of flower or herb, and it's not enjoyable. So I wanted to try to take on something that hopefully will be useful around this time of year and do a bourbon take on a French 75. So for those of you that aren't familiar with French 75, it's typically a gin-based cocktail with champagne, some kind of simple syrup, some bitters, and typically some kind of citrus. So I went over to visit our friends at Total Wine and Westport Whiskey and Wine and kind of came up with this. We're going to call it a Kentucky 75. So biggest challenge was to find an alcohol-free bourbon. And let me just tell you, those are not great. They're also not in high supply in Kentucky. So I went with a brand called Kentucky 74. It's one that I tried before back in my days working at Westport Whiskey and Wine. And that was kind of the best of what I could find in terms of flavor profile, something I thought would stand up. So it's 2 ounces of alcohol-free bourbon. You can sub in your own bourbon, 3/4 ounce lemon juice, 3/4 ounce of simple syrup. There's a couple different ways that I like to do simple syrup. If it's a springtime thing, I like to do rosemary or some other kind of real fragrant herb. If it's in the fall, I do it with some nutmeg or some cinnamon sticks. So the one I made today has got nutmeg in it. A little bit of Angostura. I like my cocktails a little bit on the bitter and spirit forward side. So I went with 4 dashes of just regular Ango. Then you pour all that in a mixing glass, stir it over ice, pour that in a coupe, and then top it with either champagne or in this case, I used sparkling white grape juice. So really fun little alternative for those of you that are throwing maybe some holiday parties. Champagne tends to come out around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, which will be coming up at the time that this airs. And that is a great alternative for guests that may be sober. Give them something that looks like a drink. You never know why people aren't drinking. You want to give them that opportunity to not have to answer a million questions. But this turned out pretty good. And something that I would offer as a good sober alternative for cocktails at parties moving forward. So yeah,
cool.
That's what I did.
And what did you call it again?
We're going to call it the Kentucky 75. So it's just
Kentucky 75. All
right. Take on a French 75, but with bourbon instead.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, mine, I'm calling The Last Dance with Widow Jane. Right. So kind of did a bit of a Rick Rubin take on it. He produced the single with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Last Dance with Mary Jane. So this is The Last Dance with Widow Jane. And as would come to no surprise, I'm using Widow Jane 10-year bourbon, 2 ounces of that, an ounce of orange juice, an ounce of maple syrup, got some muddled blackberries in there, and I'm going to smoke it. So we may have the start of my house fire recorded for the insurance company. So let's see if I can get this done. Drum roll, please. This is great, captivating viewing pleasure for our audience.
Cue the Jeopardy music.
So Let's see if we can get this going a little bit. All right, I can see the smoke coming in. If you see smoke drifting in on camera, that's what it is. So yeah, you can see it'll smoke a little bit, and then it should just
absolutely
pour out here. See, it's already got Ben
There you go.
all the way in South Carolina.
Yep. Messing me up, man.
There is.
All right.
Last Dance with Widow Jane.
Excellent.
All right, Ben, what do you have for us, buddy?
Okay.
Cheers on that.
So some mutual friends of ours, the Ewalds, had created this fall cocktail about a week or two ago, basically using apple butter and infusing mezcal. And it's a fantastic cocktail in of itself. The original is using that infused mezcal with some maple syrup, a little bit of lemon juice, and you top it off with a hard cider. And it's gorgeous. Made that earlier today. So I was inspired by that in the fact that in the past, we've done some old fashions that used a little bit of mezcal to add some smokiness to it. So basically, I wanted to take a play on the old fashioned using that apple butter infused mezcal, a little bit, about a half ounce of maple syrup to it, a couple dashes of orange bitters, and I used some Matty Gladden high rye bourbon from Spirits French Lick, and created this little play on an old fashioned, basically, and pretty good. Nice smoky character. A little bit of the apple comes through the spice, and it plays really nice with that high rye bourbon. So,
and so you've got, it has the mezcal in it.
It does. It's
and
about
the Matty Gladden.
So there's an ounce and a half of Matty Gladden, and there's a half ounce of the mezcal, and then a half ounce of maple syrup, a couple of dashes of orange bitters, and mixed and poured over ice, and then I just a little splash of club soda on top of it.
Sounds really good.
Fun. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
So, as guys that are, I would say primarily whiskey drinkers, if that's safe to say, where does a cocktail play into your drinking platform?
Used to not at all. And in the last year, especially about the last 6 months, it's really come into play a lot. It's an avenue I've really started exploring. And it's just gotten down to, sure, I love whiskey neat, but I also love to explore flavors. And that for me is where cocktails have gotten into, especially if you get into some really good ones. You're opening up and just exploring different avenues of flavor. And I think too many people think of cocktail as like, some kind of watermelon martini, fruity junk. That's not at all what I'm talking about. There's a lot of really earthy, spicy, very boozy cocktails that really emphasize the spirit. They just add additional flavor components to it that help either emphasize that or kind of take it in a different direction. And so it's become, I would say, almost 50-50. I'm either cocktail or to neat pour basically nowadays. So
how about you, Drew?
Yeah, I would say I was similar to Ben, just in that, starting out, it was all neat whiskey for me primarily, but had the chance to make a couple of great friends that were bartenders when I was in the industry, including my boss, that were just absolutely fantastic mixologists or whatever you would want to call it. And so started a similar path, doing flavors. I don't do a ton of mixing at home. That's not something I tend to take a lot of time to do, but I love, going around Louisville. We've got a great food scene here. Some incredibly gifted bartenders. And so oftentimes I'll ask, hey, what are you playing with? What's going to be on the next cocktail menu? You want to experiment on me?
Right.
And found some absolutely delicious stuff. I keep always coming back to either a Manhattan or a Gold Rush. Those are kind of my go-tos. If you can't make a good Manhattan in here, I'll probably order another cocktail from you. But love to do those, especially when I'm out.
Yeah. I will. I'm like you guys. I was not into cocktails really at all. Seemed kind of like a cop out.
Right.
So most of what I drank was just whiskey neat, whether I was at home or whether I was out. I got into cocktails probably around a year ago, no, maybe a year and a half ago, actually through the ABV Network cocktail contest, just for kicks. Just decided, well, okay, I can throw together something that I can have fun with and tell some sarcastic story and just have a good time with it. But learned a lot in that process. One of the things I learned is that I can't come close to doing what Adina Ewalds does. She's incredibly creative and talented, and puts a lot of time and effort into it, and that's just too much like work for me. But I did manage to win the ABV Network cocktail contest for last year,
right?
And that is just, if you believe in miracles, you believe in unlikelihoods. That was it. But if I'm out at a bar, if they've got a private pick, then I may get that. If they've got something on their menu that I don't have, that I think, oh, that's a pretty good value at the price, I may get that. If not, I will go to a cocktail and enjoy that, hopefully. But Drew, I think you're right. There are a lot of places around the Louisville area, especially, that they've got great bartenders, very creative, and some really good stuff. So, so tonight you guys have a good time making what you did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm enjoying this one.
Yeah. Well, side A of the show is coming to a close, and we're about to flip over to side B, and we'll talk about Rick Rubin. But before we do that, we have a very special announcement, and it's about National Alan Bishop Day. Alan Bishop Day is October 20th. Now, Alan, if you don't know Alan, I don't know why you don't know him, but Alan is the head distiller and alchemist extraordinaire at Spirits of French Lick. Now, is October 20th his birthday? Nope. Is it some sort of special anniversary of some sort? Nope. It is a somewhat random, rather viral, slightly feral day. Started last year on an episode of ABV Network's The Bourbon Daily, and it just kind of got a life of its own from there. So for a day as random, viral, and feral as that, we thought it was deserving of something special. We'll be having our first live show with special guest, you guessed it, Alan Bishop. We'll be on Facebook and on YouTube with Alan starting at 8 o'clock on October 20th. That's a Wednesday night. We will talk whiskey, we will talk music, and we will talk a whole lot more. So brace yourself. Mark your calendars for October 20th for Bourbon Turntable Live with Alan Bishop. Alan Bishop. This will
Get your shockers ready.
This will be a lot of fun. So speaking of fun, I've been looking forward to this for a while. And that's talking with you guys about Rick Rubin. Rick started Def Jam Records when he was a senior in high school. What were you doing when you were a senior in high school?
Right.
And got his I think his first act that he had signed was LL Cool J back in, I think, 84. And he also started Def American Records with George Draculius, which eventually changed its name just American Recordings. And of course, Def Jam he had with Russell Simmons. But looking at Rubin, he, first of all, he's a pretty interesting looking guy. Okay. Now, Drew, on the photo on the left, and this is a bit of an inside baseball thing for us. That's Mark Krebs, right? Mark Krebs
looks exactly like Krebs
with sunglasses and a little bit more of a beard. That's Mark Krebs. And
I think there's a Halloween costume for Krebs in there somewhere.
That's a great idea. And then on the right, there he is with Russell Simmons, and the one on the right's relatively early in his career, and the one on the left is kind of in the middle of things. But if you look at Rubin, this is a more recent picture. and I won't bother to read it because y'all can read, but looking at this list of artists, and this is very much a partial list of the artists that he has worked with in some shape, form, or capacity. So, guys, I'll just kind of open it up to you. What are the things that you see as kind of a standout about Rubin, or what are your impressions, or you have anything you'd like to share about him?
I'll jump in, I guess, quickly, only just because I have very little personal experience with him until later in life, and then realizing just how many of the records that I grew up listening to and loving were produced by him. Mostly that has to do with U2 and Tom Petty. Both of those were big bands. Got a lot of radio play around my house growing up. Once we kind of got out of the CCM phase, as has been previously mentioned. But one of the things, I found most interesting is, when Johnny Cash goes in to record what would be the Cash album and several others, later in life, there was one guy on the list to produce that, and that was Rick Rubin. And, he wanted his band to be Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And that's just a really special conglomeration of folks, I think, to produce what is, somebody who's arguably one of the bards or, most known singer-songwriters of the late 20th and early 21st centuries in Johnny Cash. So I think that says a lot about him, that so many iconic folks choose to work with him. The other thing, excuse me, I found so fascinating is his emphasis on really taking away the fluff in recording. You've got the Beatles, coming out, and there's this thing and the movement. A lot of the British invasion bands, The Who and several others, have this wall of sound idea. You're going to put as many textures and as many layers into your recording as you possibly can. And that's how you're going to, play all these festivals and all these shows. And then Rick Rubin is the guy that says, okay, we're going to get one mic in a room and we're going to record just your vocals. And then we're going to record, everybody in the same room together. He really wanted the texture, the tone of the projects that he recorded to be real people playing real instruments, singing real songs. And I think you can hear that influence on just about everything that he has touched, especially on the Americana folk and rock side of things, which is kind of more the lane I landed anyway. The other thing I thought was hilarious is that he was the audio engineer and producer on several of Andrew Dice Clay's comedy specials.
Yes.
And that, if that's not a match made in heaven, I don't know what is. So I'll listen to anything he's touched and produced. I think it's all fantastic, even if it's not necessarily my preferred genre. The guy's just an absolute wizard and a legend, for sure.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's like you could just pretty much take what he's produced and make that like a soundtrack of my childhood and youth growing up. All the different bands from hip hop to country to metal and rock. I mean, it's just, God, it's unbelievable what this guy has touched and what he has mastered and done so well. I think one of to me, kind of the interesting, I guess, anecdotal stories about him is going back to high school when he first started with Def Jam and getting that going. He was playing in a punk band and he played along with and like opened up for some really interesting groups like, the Meat Puppets. And then you see that kind of, I don't know, that mind at work about just the creativity and all with some of the stories about what they did with some of their concerts. Having I think his dad was like a police officer or something, having him show up to like shut down the show, and having friends in the out front kind of stirring things up and creating like this whole fight scene and everything just to create that drama and get that, get their name out there, just stuff like that. That's like, man, you can't make this stuff up. And a guy like that creating that. So you see that mindset at work already. And then I like what you said, Drew, about just a total parallel, or not parallel, but just swinging the pendulum to the other end of where you got the wall of sound concept to where he's kind of stripping it down. And then you see him almost like the Zen master of the studio, trying to get artists to really focus in themselves and what is it they really want out of this. So just amazing. And to be so, usually you see so many producers are kind of stuck on one genre, one style of music, and to have this guy that's just across the board.
Right.
And it's remarkable.
Right. Right. If you were to, stereotypically lay out who you would think would be the guy that took hip hop mainstream, it wouldn't be a guy like Rick Rubin.
Right.
Right. But and hip hop was going on and was strong, but when Rick Rubin brought in the Beastie Boys, it crossed that racial divide. Then the Beastie Boys were three white guys doing hip hop, and then white kids across America listened to the Beastie Boys, and then that brought them into that whole genre, and that just opened the whole thing up. And I think that was pretty much a landmark thing for Rubin at the outset of his career, really.
Right.
When probably before he was legal drinking age, he's making that kind of impact, not just on music, but on looking back on it, on society.
When you look back to who he was involved with early on, from DJ Jazzy J to Russell Simmons, from the outset almost. And bam, he's, laying the groundwork, especially for East Coast rap to really explode.
Yeah. I think it says a lot about him too, as a student of music, that he was able to take an appreciation for all the different stylistic choices and genre things, and to do them so authentically and so well. I know authenticity gets thrown around as a buzzword when we talk about music a lot, but to go from Neil Diamond to the Ghetto Boys to Eminem, I mean, it's just a wild pendulum or, area that he's able to cover. And all of the kind of big name artists in those genres look to him as the guy that says, okay, he may not be your stereotypical guy, but he's going to get us to sound like what we want to sound like.
Right.
That speaks to his ability and his, studious nature about all kinds of genres of music.
Yeah.
And speaking of genres, then you dive into, his production of Slayer.
Right.
Which has impacted metal fans, myself included, from the get-go. So to step in there and produce one of their all-time, well, really, I'd consider it one of their all-time greatest albums. And he seems to do that. He typically seems to come in, and whatever work he does with somebody, that tends to be one of either their breakout or one of their greatest albums. So
are you talking about Rain and Blood?
Yep.
Yeah. And I am not a Slayer fan. Sorry, Pat Heist, I'm not. Hope you're watching, Pat. And if you are, consider this an invitation to come on the show, and we'll talk about Slayer. But I'm not. That's just a little too dark for my tastes. But when you go back and you listen to the pre-Rubin Slayer, it's so overproduced, and there's so much reverb in it, and they play so fast. It's just so muddy, and you can't hear, or if you're into that, appreciate really what they're doing, from an instrument standpoint. But he came in, pulled, Drew, like you were talking about, he really scaled that stuff back, and you can hear more of the details of what they're doing. And I think it made a big difference in what Slayer did musically, and changed their direction, and made it where it was more musical, if that's a fair way to say it. But it gave more credence to what they were doing, what they were playing, as opposed to just the frantic nature and the chaotic nature of their music before. And again, I'm not a big Slayer guy, so I may be speaking completely out of turn on that, but that's just my take on it.
Right.
Now, one thing, he brought Rubin brought Kerry King, who's the guitarist for Slayer, in to the Beastie Boys to play guitar on License to Ill. I think he played the guitar solo in No Sleep Till Brooklyn. So, and I think a couple others. And
right.
To hear him tell it, he didn't really like them and they didn't really like him, but it worked. And, you know, he found a way to make it work. So that was pretty interesting, I thought.
There was an allusion to that, I think, at one of the awards ceremonies. They kind of went in at him a little bit from what I was reading about. We want to thank, you know, our manager, our label, and to Rick Rubin for teaching us how not to produce. And I was like, yeah, you're there winning an award for a record that you produced, man.
Yes.
Come on, chill out.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there
seems to be that. I was going to say there seems to be a lot of love-hate relationship kind of with Rick Rubin with musicians in the industry. They, you know, I think Corey Taylor from Slipknot, same way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and still, in my opinion, one of their better albums. I think personally, they got a lot of really good albums, but the one that Rubin was involved with. So,
yeah, again, not a Slipknot guy, but if I was going to listen to Slipknot, it would probably be that album.
Yeah.
And you know, when you look at what he did with Red Hot Chili Peppers,
yes,
I think some of their best albums were with him. And
I mean, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, it's
hard to beat.
That's just an all-time classic. Yeah.
And you know, I went back and listened to that again this week, and really enjoyed it. So excellent stuff. And when you look at, let's pull this up again. Now he only did one song with Jay-Z.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do one song with Jay-Z, it might as well be 99 Problems. So yeah, that's kind of a hit machine kind of thing. But you know, the guy that did Slayer is also the guy that produced Adele.
Right.
You know, and you look at, to me, and I probably not to a lot of people, but to me, the crowning achievement is the Wildflowers album by Tom Petty. And he worked with Petty on a couple of solo albums, and with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers on, I think it was the Echo album. And apparently when they were recording the Echo album, Tom was doing, trying to be very discreet about doing some pretty heavy drugs at the time. And because he was just going through a divorce, in a bad spot. And Rick Rubin went behind Tom's back and told his kids what was going on so that they could intervene. And they didn't work together anymore. But you know, in hindsight, it was probably the best, most considerate thing that could have been done in the situation.
Right.
So anything else on this list that kind of stands out to you, or you're a particular fan of?
I mean, there's so much for me. I mean, LL Cool J was very early on a big hip hop influence for me when I was younger. You know, a lot of people nowadays think of him as the actor, but honestly, going back into late 80s, you know, the 80s, early 90s, the guy was cranking out some serious hits on the hip hop scene. Obviously, Beastie Boys, License to Ill, that album hit. That was absolutely huge. I was a big Public Enemy fan growing up. Still am, from the hip hop scene of things. Run DMC the same way. Gosh, it's, you know, Rage Against the Machine, Black Sabbath, Audio Slave, Typo Negative. But for me, probably, I guess personally, the standout is the work he did with Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
I think that out of everything, for me personally, that's like the crown jewel in all of it. What he did with Johnny Cash, and especially getting him to record the 9 Inch Nails song "Hurt," which I think, you know, everybody has just about heard or referenced that in some way, shape, or form. That was, I mean, just brilliant, absolute brilliance.
Yeah.
But
yeah, he had trouble getting Johnny Cash to agree to record that song.
Right.
He kept sending him, he would send him playlists, you know, what are we going to do in the next album? Because I think they did 5 or 6 albums together. And he kept including that song on it.
Right.
And then he finally just sent him the lyrics. And I think that's what ultimately intrigued Johnny enough to really explore it. And the video to that song it just adds to the power of the song itself.
Right.
And apparently Johnny was very reticent about doing that video because at that time his health was deteriorating and you could tell it.
Yeah.
But his family talked him into it and said, you know, this is, you know, let's be transparent, let's be authentic with it. And man, it's one of the most powerful music videos that you would see, and it was by a man who was, I don't know, probably in his 70s at the time.
Yeah. And that's another thing Rubin did was with Johnny Cash, you know, here you got a brilliant, you know, probably one of the all-time great songwriters, and you're getting him to play other people's songs and getting other people to write songs for Johnny Cash to play. And that was part of the, just, I don't know, coming in with this out of left field approach for somebody that turns out to be just absolute gold.
Yeah.
There's one thing I want to dive into a little bit when dealing with Rick Rubin, and that for me is something, it's personal with music that I've come to, I can hear, I guess I have an ear for things. I hear it, having, you know, play guitar some, I've messed around with it. I haven't had any recording experience like you have, Drew, but the whole issue of the use of compression and using it overly so in the studio, and you know, a lot of people calling him the king of loud and whatnot. And that has bothered me with a lot of music in the last while, because I can hear it. I can hear that the way the tones are compressed and just how it comes across. Not the biggest fan of it personally, but wonder what you guys, what your thoughts are.
I think he takes a fair amount of flack for that. That's not the first time I've heard that. I understand, I guess, from a technically like audio engineering side, why you would do that. Just because a lot of the instruments that he records tend to fall in the same bandwidth of frequencies. And so if you can compress a guitar, you know, to 150 different hertz, and that's the only range that you're going to hear that guitar in, okay, well, that makes that guitar stand out in just that range. But you really, I think in some ways it does limit the dynamic range of different instruments in a way that doesn't lend itself to, especially to live music.
Right.
Yeah.
But you lose a lot of nuance.
Yeah. But that's his style.
Yeah.
And if part of it is what he does technically from a recording standpoint, part of it is what he does to coach or motivate or lead the artists to their height, to their creativity heights. And you know, maybe I don't think one producer for one band forever is necessarily a great thing. But I think there's a if you're a musician, I think you've got to kind of weigh that in the balance. Okay, here are these potential negatives about some of the things that he does in technically in the recording, but here are the positive things in terms of pulling the most creativity out of the people that he works with. And I think getting into too much of a rut as an artist is a thing. I think you can get stale. You can get very comfortable with the way something's being done, and you may need somebody else to come in and shake things up for you. And I think Rubin does that. And in a lot of different ways. But I think Ben, I think that is a valid criticism
and
of him.
I think most of the criticism comes from the listener's end as well. It's people hearing it, the loudness that it creates, as well as just how stiffen. I don't know, stiffen is the right word. The way the dynamic range is compressed, literally. So it's yeah, I can hear it sometimes. Certain songs on the radio, or when I'm listening, or especially if I've got good headphones, I'm listening to something. I can really pick up and hear that, and it's a little off-putting to me at times. And
do you hear it more in specific genres? Like if you're listening to hard rock and metal more?
I hear it a lot more in hard rock and metal, exactly. And that's where a lot of producers have picked up on doing that, and it's kind of become a thing.
Right. Kind of creates a false distortion. Is that a word? Is that a term?
I would say it almost amplifies the distortion, maybe is kind of the right way to put that. But yeah, it's just hard. It gets harder to pick up on a lot of the nuance of things that you want to hear. And then two, it comes across as almost just like it's funny because we talk about the wall of sound on one end, and what Rick Rubin does is strip down, but at the same time, that's also kind of what he's doing by producing that. Is it hits your ears with so much intensity, maybe is the right way to describe that, and you're kind of left going trying to differentiate some of the instruments and whatnot. It gets a little harder. So
interesting,
good stuff. Yeah.
But any other thoughts on Rick Rubin? So if you've got a Mount Rushmore of music producers, is he on it?
Oh, he has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very few other people that are as prolific and diverse as he is, and as well respected as he is. There's some others that certainly belong up there, but he's up there for me.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's probably right up there close to the top. And it's one of those things I look at it too from, you can sit there and analyze from a career standpoint of, who's produced the most hits and who's produced this and who's produced that. But when I'm looking at it from just a personal, who has produced music and songs and bands that have touched my life and impacted me, he's right up there close to the very top, if not the top.
So just we'll do a little bit of a future show planning session right here as we're recording this show. Who else would you put up there with him? And you don't have to name three more, but who else do you think is kind of in that league as far as producers go?
I can throw out some names, and then we can sit here in the future and kind of track down and get who the three are. But Quincy Jones, who we talked about with Michael Jackson, Jerry Wexler. For me, one that I don't know if he gets mentioned up there. Well, actually, there's two that I don't know if they get mentioned up in like the upper echelon of music producers, but Kenny Edmonds, otherwise known as Babyface.
Babyface, yeah.
I mean, my God, middle school into high school, some of the R&B and hip hop music that he produced, that he wrote, that he was a part of, you almost have a hard time not finding him involved in some way, shape, or form in all of that. Another one that's probably most people don't think of at all is Butch Vig. So he's drummer for Garbage, but he's most famously known for producing Nirvana's Nevermind.
Yeah.
But he also produced the first two albums for Smashing Pumpkins, Gish and Siamese Dream. He was involved with bands like Green Day, Sonic Youth, L7. So that whole early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, grunge, post-punk kind of thing, very much a part of. And for you, Drew, he was, as well as Kevin, worked with the Foo Fighters also on a couple of their albums. So, but he's another guy that I think doesn't get a lot of praise, but for me, some of the things he's been involved with were very big for me personally. So
I love that call out. I like Butch Vig as well. I would put him up there, maybe not on the top four, but certainly super noteworthy. I don't know that I would have a ton to add to that conversation. I know anything that Dave Cobb has ever produced, I've loved. all of his stuff with Stapleton, with the Avett Brothers. That's a sound that I really gravitate towards, and he just does that so well. I think you got to talk about somebody like Dr. Dre, and you know, even Jay-Z, maybe to a lesser extent, but his career is still going nuts. You know, if you look at some of the projects that he's done, you know, all the stuff with Kanye, specifically the Watch the Throne album. He knows what he's doing, and he's got a distinct sound. But I would throw those couple of guys in there as well as just maybe honorable mentions, or at least put them for your consideration.
Yeah. I would certainly say Quincy Jones. I think that he's genius. Nile Rodgers would be somebody I would put on the list for the work that he did with his own band Chic, and Diana Ross and David Bowie. And there's a long list of artists that he's produced and worked with. Tom Dowd, he goes back a ways. He did some work with Charlie Parker and some early jazz guys, as well as work with Allman Brothers and Derek and the Dominoes, Eric Clapton, Rod Stewart. So it's kind of in that 60s, early 70s and previous, but he's got a very long who's who list of artists that he's worked with. Bless you.
Thank you.
So, and you look at Jimmy Miller and the work that he did primarily with Rolling Stones back in the 70s, some of the best rock albums of all time he was involved with. But yeah, and I think in terms of contemporary producers, Dave Cobb is certainly somebody that's got to be on that list and be considered, because he's as close to batting 1,000 as anybody is. So just a couple quick things on Rick Rubin, and then we'll kind of close out side B of the show. He does have a podcast that is probably worth some of your time. It's called Broken Record. And he does interviews with other people from the music world primarily. And it's fascinating, especially if you're a music geek. There's a documentary on Hulu called McCartney 321. And if you're a fan of the Beatles, why haven't you already watched it? If you're not a fan of the Beatles, but you love music, I would highly recommend it. It's very interesting, and Rick Rubin is just doing deep dive conversations with Paul McCartney on lots of things to do with the Beatles, but a lot to do with music in general. And then on October 20th, which would have been Tom Petty's birthday, there is a documentary coming out called Somewhere You Feel Free, which is a documentary of the making of the Wildflowers album, which I mentioned earlier. Rick Rubin produced it. I think that it's fantastic, and I will look forward to seeing that documentary, I'm sure, more than once. But those are just some other things that he's involved with. I probably doesn't leave a whole lot of time for record producing. And again, that if you go back to Slipknot, that was one of the complaints they had, is they just never saw him. And I think some things he's gone to giving himself the title executive producer, and he's got a network of people working with him, under him, that are handling more of the day-to-day. But his legacy and the depth of his work, it really can't be denied too much. So that is Rick Rubin. I'm sure we didn't do him justice, but hopefully it will be something that will prompt people to go back, listen to some of his music. And obviously, if you're listening to the show and you have some thoughts on Rubin, or some of your favorite songs and artists that he's worked with, please leave those in the comments. We appreciate the comments that we've been receiving so far, and we'll certainly answer you back. So as we're closing things up, Ben, tell us about another Bar Cart show that we've got.
So Bar Cart Co-op, we are a fantastic group of different podcast YouTubers. One of the shows we do, I'm personally involved with, called My Whiskey Den, featuring Patrick out of Wisconsin. Mike is out of Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm stationed here in South Carolina. And we report on craft whiskey that's going on all across the U.S. We have a special Monday show called An Evening With, where we bring in distillers and industry people and basically just like to have a chat. We look at the format as being we're hanging out at the distillery after hours, having a drink and talking about what they're doing. And it's a show we really like to get very nerdy with and get into the details of the whiskey industry and distilling and the arts involved there. And so if you got a penchant and a desire to learn more and to go deep on that, we're the show for you on that. So typically we're on Monday nights. Occasionally we might pop up on a Friday or Saturday with a whiskey review. You can find us on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook, My Whiskey Den.
Yeah, it really is a fun show. And I would say that even if you weren't sitting here, Ben, it's a lot of fun. You guys do a great job. You've had some fascinating guests on there. So testimonial, tune in Monday nights, 9:00 Eastern time. It's fantastic. Drew, tell everybody what we're doing next week.
All right. Well, as you hear this recording, next week will be our live episode with none other than Alan Bishop. Can't wait for that. But the following, when we return to regularly scheduled programming, we'll be talking right before Halloween about pairing whiskeys and Halloween candy. So 2 things that I'm extremely passionate about. I'm looking forward to that for sure. It's going to be a great time.
Yeah, that will be a lot of fun. And until next time, I want to thank everybody for joining us on behalf of Ben, Drew, and myself. Cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Cheers.
Night.